Thomas woke before sunrise, the same way he did every day. The ranch was always quiet at that hour, with only the soft sound of wind passing through the dry grass. He liked those calm mornings. They made him feel that the world was still safe, still peaceful, even if only for a moment. After feeding his horses, he saddled up to check the fence line along the creek. Animals sometimes broke through during the night, and Thomas liked to fix problems before they became bigger. The air was cool and a thin mist rested above the ground. His horse walked slowly, each step soft on the dirt. As Thomas approached the creek, he noticed something unusual. A small shape sat under the old cottonwood tree by the water. At first, he thought it might be an injured animal or someone from a nearby settlement, but as he got closer, he realized it was a young woman. She sat with her knees pulled up to her chest. Her long, dark hair hung around her shoulders, tangled with dust. Her clothes were worn, her feet bare and tired. She looked as if she had been walking for days. Thomas stopped his horse and called out softly, not wanting to scare her. She lifted her head slowly, and he saw fear in her eyes, fear mixed with exhaustion. Thomas climbed down and kept some distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. He asked if she was all right, but she didn't answer at first. She stared at him with uncertainty, as if trying to decide whether he was safe. After a long pause, she whispered a few words so quietly he almost didn't hear them. "No man wants me." Her voice was flat, almost empty. Those words carried a kind of sadness Thomas hadn't heard in years. He felt something tighten inside him, sympathy maybe, or just the simple human need to help someone in pain. He offered her water, moving slowly so she could see he meant no harm. She hesitated, her eyes flicking from his face to the bottle, as if unsure whether accepting help would bring trouble. Finally, she reached out with trembling hands and drank. Her throat worked slowly, like each swallow took effort. When she finished, she gave the bottle back without looking up. Thomas asked her name. After a long silence, she said, "Naha." Her voice carried the soft accent of her Apache people. Thomas nodded gently. He told her he wasn't there to hurt her, and he didn't want anything from her. He only wanted to know if she needed help. Naha looked around as if expecting someone to appear from behind the trees. She seemed unsure of everything, unsure of him, unsure of herself, unsure of whether she was allowed to trust anyone. She finally spoke again, explaining in small broken sentences that her group had moved on after disagreements. She had been left behind, not because she was dangerous or unkind, but simply because no one wanted her with them anymore. Thomas didn't understand why. She looked young, maybe 18 or 19, too young to wander alone in dangerous land. But she didn't offer many details, and he didn't push her for more. He could see she was tired of speaking, tired of explaining herself. Some pain was too deep to describe. He asked her if she had eaten. She shook her head. Thomas reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of bread. She took it slowly and ate in small bites, as if she wasn't used to having food handed to her. Thomas watched her with calm eyes, careful not to stare too long. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. After a few minutes, he softly said she could rest at his cabin. He explained that it was a small place but safe. She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes filled with fear again, the kind that came from past experiences. Thomas realized she had probably learned not to trust anyone easily, especially men. He stepped back, giving her space. He told her she didn't have to come with him. She could stay under the tree if she wished. But if she needed shelter, he could offer it. No expectations, no pressure. Just a warm place and safety. Something in his voice must have reached her. Maybe it was the softness, maybe the honesty, maybe the fact that he didn't act like others she had met before. Slowly, she nodded. It was a small nod, almost invisible, but it meant she was willing to go with him. Thomas extended his hand halfway, then stopped. He didn't want to frighten her. Instead, he walked back to his horse and waited. Naha stood up shakily, using the tree for support. Her legs looked weak, like she hadn't slept in days. Thomas helped her onto his horse carefully, making sure she felt balanced before climbing up behind her, keeping a respectful distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Naha kept her eyes on the ground, her hands gripping the saddle horn tightly. Thomas didn't speak unless necessary. He understood that silence was kinder than questions. Sometimes quiet was the only thing a frightened person could handle. When they reached his cabin, Thomas gently guided her inside. The place was simple: one bedroom, a small kitchen, and a wooden table with 2 chairs. The walls smelled faintly of pine wood. Sunlight came through the window, lighting the room warmly. Naha stood near the door, unsure whether she was allowed to enter fully. Thomas told her she could stay in the spare room. It wasn't much, just a bed, a blanket, and a small shelf, but it was clean. She walked inside slowly, touching nothing at first, just looking around like someone who didn't know how long she would be allowed to stay. Thomas cooked a small meal of beans and bread. When he placed the plate in front of her, she stared at it for several seconds before eating. She ate quietly, carefully, as if she didn't want to make noise. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear now, but from hunger. After the meal, Thomas let her rest. He stepped outside to finish the day's work, fixing fences and checking his horses. But his thoughts kept returning to the girl in his spare room. There was something about her that stirred an old part of him, a part that remembered how lonely life could feel. He didn't know her story yet, but he sensed it was heavy. When evening came, he checked on her again. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the small window at the darkening sky. She looked peaceful for the first time since he found her. When she noticed him, she straightened slightly, unsure of what to do. Thomas simply asked if she needed anything. She shook her head. Before leaving the doorway, she whispered something. It was soft, almost too soft to hear. "Why are you helping me?" Thomas paused. He didn't know how to explain the truth, that helping her felt natural, like the right thing to do. So he kept his answer simple. He said that no one deserved to be alone, especially when they were hurting. Naha looked down at her hands. Her fingers twisted together nervously. She repeated her earlier words, almost like she was reminding herself of something she believed deeply. "No man wants me." Thomas felt a sting in his chest at the sadness in her voice. He didn't argue with her, didn't try to force hope on her. He only said she didn't have to think about that right now. She was safe for the night. She could rest. Naha nodded once, and for the first time, her shoulders relaxed a little. It was small, but Thomas noticed. That night, he lay in his own room staring at the ceiling. He had brought strangers home before, travelers needing shelter, lost riders passing through, but none had ever carried such quiet sorrow. He wondered what could make someone so young feel unwanted. He didn't know yet, but he planned to be patient. Outside, the wind moved gently across the land, brushing the tall grass like a mother soothing a child. Inside the cabin, for the first time in a long time, the ranch didn't feel empty. A quiet presence filled the space, a tired girl who had nowhere else to go. And Thomas, a man who lived his life helping others without expecting anything in return, felt something shift inside him. He didn't know it yet, but meeting Naha under that cottonwood tree would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Thomas woke up early as usual, but this time, there was a different feeling in the cabin. It wasn't the usual emptiness he was used to. There was quiet movement coming from the small spare room. For a moment, he stopped to listen. It felt strange, yet comforting to know someone else was there. He stepped outside to start his chores, but he kept thinking about Naha. He wondered if she had slept well, if she felt safe, or if she was still scared and unsure. Thomas wasn't a man who talked much, but he was someone who paid attention. He knew that trust didn't grow overnight. When he returned to the cabin after feeding the animals, he was surprised to see Naha awake and standing in the kitchen area. She looked unsure, as if she didn't know whether she was allowed to touch anything. She stood still, her hands held close to her chest, waiting to see what he would say. Thomas greeted her with a gentle voice. She nodded slowly in return, her eyes dropping to the floor. She looked cleaner today. She had washed her face and brushed her hair with her fingers as best she could. She still seemed tired, but there was a small light in her eyes, something almost like hope. He made breakfast, simple bread and warm beans. He placed a plate in front of her, and she hesitated for a moment, then sat down carefully. She ate in small bites, still quiet, still watching him from time to time as if studying him. Thomas didn't push conversation. He just let her eat in peace. After breakfast, Naha stood and began cleaning the table on her own. Thomas told her she didn't need to do any chores, but she shook her head. She said softly that she wanted to help. She didn't want to feel like a burden. Her voice trembled slightly as she said that word, burden, as if it carried weight from her past. Thomas didn't argue. If helping made her feel better, he would let her. He went outside to fix the fence again, and Naha followed him. She kept her distance but watched what he was doing. After a while, she stepped closer and asked if she could help. Thomas hesitated, not because he didn't want her help, but because he wasn't sure what she felt confident doing. But she waited patiently, and he finally handed her a small tool, showing her how to hold it. She listened carefully, watching every movement he made as if she wanted to learn quickly. When she helped him place a wooden post upright, her hands trembled a little, but she didn't stop. Thomas noticed her effort and thanked her. A tiny smile appeared on her face, so small that most people might have missed it, but Thomas didn't. By midday, they had repaired a long stretch of the fence. Naha wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, breathing slowly. She wasn't used to ranch work, but she tried without complaining. Thomas admired that quietly. They walked back to the cabin for lunch. On the way, Naha glanced at the wide-open sky, the tall grass, and the quiet land stretching in every direction. It was clear she wasn't used to such peaceful surroundings. She kept looking around as if expecting someone to suddenly appear from the horizon. Thomas noticed her unease and reassured her gently. He told her that no one would come without him knowing. The land was quiet and open. Anyone approaching would be seen from far away. She nodded but still looked uncertain. Inside the cabin, Naha tried to help again. She cleaned the small kitchen, washed the dishes carefully, and swept the floor. She moved quietly, almost silently, like someone trained to take up as little space as possible. Thomas wanted to tell her she didn't need to work so hard, but he sensed that helping made her feel safer, like she had a place and purpose. Later in the afternoon, Thomas brought in one of his horses that had a small cut on its leg. Naha watched from a distance at first, then came closer when she realized the horse wasn't dangerous. She crouched next to the animal, running her fingers gently near the wound without touching it. Her movements were careful, soft, and full of respect. She asked if she could help treat the horse. Thomas nodded and explained what she should do. She followed each instruction slowly, her eyes focused. When the horse nuzzled her shoulder gently, she froze at first, then smiled. A real, warm smile that made her entire face soften. Thomas felt a strange warmth inside his chest seeing that. It wasn't romantic or anything rushed. It was something quieter, like watching someone slowly come back to life after too much pain. As the sun began to fall, Naha stepped outside while Thomas prepared supper. She stood near the cabin, staring at the horizon. The golden light touched her face, making her look peaceful. Thomas watched her from the doorway for a moment. She looked like she belonged there, even though she didn't believe it yet. When supper was ready, they sat at the table again. This time, Naha talked a little more. She told him about her past in short sentences. She said she never felt wanted among her people. She wasn't strong enough, not skilled enough, not important enough. Every mistake she made became a reason for someone to tell her she was useless. Thomas listened carefully, his eyes calm and gentle. He didn't interrupt her. He didn't question her feelings. He simply let her speak. When she finished, she stared down at her hands, waiting for him to say something. Thomas told her that she wasn't useless. He said she worked hard, learned quickly, and helped without being asked. He said she had value, even if others failed to see it. Naha's eyes filled with emotion, but she kept herself composed. She whispered that no man had ever said anything kind to her before. Thomas didn't know what to say to that. It hurt him to think of anyone being treated so poorly. He simply told her that kindness didn't cost anything, and she deserved it as much as anyone. That evening, after supper, Naha helped wash the dishes. She worked quietly beside him, and for the first time, Thomas felt something close to companionship, a feeling he hadn't had in years. The cabin no longer felt like an empty place with echoes in every corner. It felt warm, filled with small, gentle moments. Later that night, Naha sat on the porch while Thomas fed the horses one last time. The sky was full of stars, and a soft breeze moved through the grass. When Thomas finished, he joined her. They sat together in silence, watching the sky. Neither felt the need to talk. Naha broke the silence after several minutes. She said she didn't know how long she would stay, and she didn't want to cause problems for him. Thomas answered simply that she wasn't causing trouble. He said she was free to stay as long as she needed. She looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Before going inside, she whispered, "Thank you." It was soft, but it held more meaning than many longer sentences. Over the next few days, their routine slowly formed. Naha woke early and helped with small chores. She learned how to feed the chickens, gather eggs, brush the horses, and even cook simple meals. She wasn't perfect at everything, but she tried with full effort. Thomas appreciated her spirit. He taught her gently, never raising his voice or showing frustration. Naha watched him closely, memorizing every word he said, every movement he made. Whenever she succeeded at something, he would nod proudly, and she would smile in a shy way, as if she wasn't used to praise. Evenings were the calmest time. They often sat together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they said nothing, but the silence between them never felt heavy. It felt safe. One evening, Naha told him she never knew a place could be so quiet. She said she always felt noise in her mind, voices, fear, doubt, but on the ranch, that noise began to fade. She said she slept better than she had in years. Thomas felt good hearing that. He didn't say it, but he hoped she would stay longer. The ranch felt different with her there, warmer, gentler. The bond between them didn't grow suddenly. It grew slowly, like a small plant finding light after being hidden in the dark for too long. There were no grand moments, no dramatic scenes, just everyday kindness, shared work, and silent understanding. And although Naha still struggled with the belief that no man wanted her, she began to see small signs that she wasn't unwanted here. She began to feel like the ranch could be more than just a place to hide. It could be a place to heal. Thomas never said it out loud, but he already knew one thing with complete certainty. Naha belonged there far more than she believed. The peaceful days at the ranch continued, and Naha slowly began to trust the quiet life she was building with Thomas. But peace on the frontier never lasted forever, and both of them soon learned that safety could be fragile. It started one warm afternoon. Thomas was working near the barn, repairing a loose board, while Naha was gathering herbs by the creek. She had learned which plants were good for tea, which were used for treating small wounds, and which ones kept insects away. She enjoyed those small tasks. They made her feel useful, and being close to nature always calmed her mind. While she walked along the edge of the water, she heard something in the distance, soft at first, like distant footsteps. She froze. The wind carried voices next, low but firm. Naha's heart tightened. She knew those tones, the rhythm of the speech, the sharpness in the words. She recognized them from her past. They belonged to the men from her former group. Fear swept through her body like a cold wave. She crouched low and moved quietly through the tall grass back toward the ranch. Her breath felt trapped in her chest. Old memories returned, being scolded, blamed, overlooked. She had always been the one people forgot, the one pushed aside, the one who never mattered. But here at the ranch, she had started to feel different. She didn't want that small sense of belonging to disappear. When she reached Thomas, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly. She struggled to speak, her voice catching in her throat. Finally, she whispered that people from her group were nearby. Thomas put down his tools and stood tall, his calm expression turning serious. He asked how many she had heard. Naha said at least 3. Thomas didn't panic. Instead, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder and told her to go inside the cabin while he checked the situation. She didn't want to leave him, but he insisted gently. She trusted him enough to obey, though her steps felt heavy as she walked toward the cabin. Inside, she stayed near the window, watching the open land with wide, anxious eyes. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if they forced her to return? What if they accused Thomas of keeping her against her will? What if they brought trouble to the ranch? She clenched her hands, fighting the fear that tried to take over her. Outside, Thomas stood near the barn, waiting calmly. He wasn't a man who sought trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it either. He had lived on the frontier long enough to know that courage didn't come from raising your voice. It came from standing quietly when others tried to intimidate you. Soon, 3 riders appeared from the west. They slowed their horses when they reached the ranch. Thomas didn't move. His presence alone was steady and clear. He would not be pushed easily. The men looked around the ranch, their eyes sharp and filled with suspicion. One of them spoke first, asking if Thomas had seen an Apache girl wandering alone. They described Naha in rough detail. Thomas didn't deny it. He simply said she was staying here, safe. The men exchanged glances. The one in front asked why Thomas was keeping her, saying she belonged with them. The way he spoke carried a tone that made Thomas's jaw tighten, not anger, but a protective instinct. Thomas told them she was free to stay where she wished, and she hadn't been forced to go anywhere. The men didn't like that answer. They claimed she had run away. They said she was their responsibility. They insisted she must return. Inside the cabin, Naha heard their voices. Her heart pounded painfully. Part of her wanted to run and hide, but another part, the part Thomas helped strengthen, told her to stand and face the moment. She didn't want to live in fear anymore. She stepped outside slowly. Her legs shook with each step, but she kept moving. When she reached Thomas's side, she stood slightly behind him, drawing strength from his calm presence. The men looked at her, and she felt their judgment immediately. They asked her why she had left them. They said she was causing trouble. Their words cut into her like old wounds reopening. But before she could shrink back into silence, Thomas stepped slightly forward. He didn't raise his voice or act aggressive. He simply said Naha could speak for herself. The men turned their attention to her. Naha struggled to speak. Her breath felt trapped again. She looked at Thomas, and he gave her the smallest nod, just enough to remind her that she wasn't alone. Finally, she found her voice. She said she didn't want to return. She said she felt safe here. She said she wanted to stay. Her words weren't loud, but they were steady. They came from a place of pain and courage mixing together. The men reacted with frustration, trying to argue that she didn't know what she wanted. They said she was confused, young, unable to make decisions, but Thomas didn't allow them to twist her words. He stood firm, reminding them she wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't property. She had the right to choose. Silence hung between them. The men didn't know how to respond to such calm resistance. They weren't used to anyone defending Naha. They weren't used to someone treating her like she mattered. After a few tense moments, they realized forcing her back would cause a conflict they didn't want. They muttered their displeasure, warned Thomas that trouble might follow, then turned their horses and left. Naha watched them ride away until they were far into the horizon. Her legs weakened and she felt herself shaking. Thomas placed a gentle hand on her back to support her. She didn't collapse, but she leaned on him for strength she didn't yet have on her own. When they went inside the cabin, Naha sat down quietly. Thomas poured her some water, which she drank slowly. Her hands trembled, and her breath came unevenly. He didn't pressure her to speak. He let her sit in silence until she was ready. Finally, she whispered that she was scared. Scared they would come back, scared they would punish her, scared that staying with Thomas would bring danger to him. Thomas sat across from her, leaning forward slightly so she could see he was sincere. He told her that he wasn't afraid of trouble, not when doing the right thing brought it. He said she wasn't a burden. He said she had the right to choose her own path. Naha's eyes filled with emotion. No one had ever defended her before. No one had stood for her so quietly, yet so firmly. The strength in Thomas's words didn't come from anger. It came from compassion. The rest of the day passed slowly. Naha stayed close to the cabin, still shaken but comforted by Thomas's presence. He continued his work as usual, not treating her like she was a problem. His normal behavior helped her relax. It reminded her that life didn't stop because fear appeared. That evening, they sat on the porch again. The sky glowed purple and gold. Naha leaned her head against the wooden post beside her, watching the colors blend across the horizon. She felt tired, but she also felt something unexpected: relief. She whispered that she never wanted to see those men again. She said she never wanted to go back to the life she had before. She didn't say it directly, but her voice carried a silent request. She wanted this place to be her home. Thomas told her gently that she could stay as long as she wished. She looked at him with gratitude so deep it made her eyes shine in the fading light. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to their peaceful rhythm. The men didn't return. The ranch stayed quiet. But something in Naha had changed. She no longer moved like she expected someone to take her away. She no longer worked in silence out of fear. She began to relax when she cooked, to hum softly while cleaning, to smile more often when Thomas praised her work. She wasn't healed completely. Old wounds still lived inside her. But she was growing stronger. She felt protected, seen, and valued. And Thomas, without saying it out loud, felt a new sense of purpose in having her there. He didn't plan to keep her. He didn't claim ownership. But he protected her as someone worthy of safety, dignity, and quiet care. And for Naha, that meant everything. After the day the men rode away, a gentle calm filled the ranch again. But something inside Naha had changed. She no longer looked over her shoulder every few minutes. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. She still carried old fears in her heart, but now she also carried something new: trust. Trust in Thomas, trust in the ranch, trust in herself. It was small and fragile, but it was real. Thomas saw the change, though he didn't say anything. He wasn't the kind of man who spoke big words. Instead, he showed his thoughts through actions: steady kindness, daily respect, and a calm presence that made Naha feel grounded. When he walked into a room, she felt the air settle. When he spoke, she felt safe. Even silence with him felt warm. As days passed, Naha became part of the ranch's heartbeat. Every morning she woke early, sometimes even before Thomas, and prepared simple breakfast. She made fresh tea from the herbs she gathered. The cabin, once quiet and empty, now carried the soft sounds of movement. It no longer felt like a place for one person. It felt lived in. It felt warm. It felt like a home. Thomas didn't ask her to do anything. She helped by choice. It made her feel she belonged. One morning, Thomas came in from the barn with a surprised but gentle smile. He said one of the horses, the quiet mare Naha often brushed, had given birth during the night. Naha's face lit up with excitement. She followed him quickly, her steps soft but full of eagerness. When they reached the barn, the newborn foal stood close to its mother, its legs wobbly, its eyes wide with innocence. Naha knelt beside it, amazed. She had never seen anything so small and full of life. She whispered soft words, and the foal blinked at her curiously. Thomas watched her, noticing how naturally she connected with animals. They trusted her gentle spirit. She had a calm patience that even he admired. He told her she could help raise the foal, and the way her eyes brightened made him feel something warm inside. Over the next weeks, Naha poured herself into caring for the foal. She gave it a name, Little Star, because of a tiny white mark on its forehead. She groomed it, fed it, and spent long hours teaching it not to fear human touch. The foal followed her around like a loyal shadow. Sometimes Thomas stood back and simply watched, smiling softly at how peaceful she looked. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange, Naha and Thomas sat outside on the porch. The warm breeze brushed across the land. The world felt quiet and complete. Naha hugged her knees close to her chest and looked out at the open fields. She said she never thought a place could feel like this. Calm, safe, full of life. She admitted she used to believe she brought trouble wherever she went, but here she felt like she could breathe again, like her heart could rest. Thomas didn't interrupt her. He listened, like he always did. Naha said she didn't understand why he helped her. She said she didn't know what she offered in return. Her voice trembled slightly as she added that she was afraid one day he would tell her to leave and she would have nowhere else to go. Thomas turned to her with a calm expression. He told her that she wasn't here because she owed him anything. She wasn't here because she needed to earn her place. She was here because she belonged, simply by being herself. He said she brought life into the cabin, warmth to the ranch, and peace to his quiet days. Naha looked down, hiding the emotion in her eyes. No one had ever told her she made life better for someone. The days continued like that, quiet, steady rhythms filled with work, small smiles, shared meals, and peaceful evenings. Sometimes Naha laughed softly at something Thomas said, though he always acted like he hadn't been trying to be funny. Sometimes she told him stories from her childhood, simple memories, nothing painful. She trusted him with those gentle pieces of her past. Thomas taught her more about ranch life, how to mend a saddle, how to guide a horse gently, how to handle the young cattle during branding season. She learned quickly, absorbing every lesson. And she taught him things too, how to notice small signs in the wind, how to read the movements of the birds, how to find herbs that helped with pain. Their lives blended in small but meaningful ways. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the land. The sky darkened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Naha had always been afraid of storms, not because of the sound, but because storms used to mean danger in her old life, people shouting, people hiding. people expecting her to do tasks she wasn't strong enough for. But now, Thomas stood beside her as the first drops fell, and she didn't feel the old fear. He closed the barn doors while she held the lantern steady. When lightning flashed, she flinched only slightly, and Thomas noticed. He spoke softly, reminding her she was safe. His voice carried more comfort than the walls of the barn. That night, the storm raged outside, but inside the cabin the fire glowed warmly. Naha sat close to it, wrapped in a blanket. Thomas made tea and handed her a cup. She smiled at him softly, grateful for the simple kindness. She confessed that storms used to make her feel small and scared. Thomas replied that storms came and went, but good people stayed. The words were simple, but they touched something deep in her. When the storm ended the next morning, the world felt washed clean. The air smelled fresh. The land shimmered with new light. Naha walked outside and lifted her face to the sky, feeling a strange sense of renewal. As weeks passed, the memory of the men who came looking for her began to fade. They never returned. Maybe they gave up. Maybe they realized Thomas wasn't someone who backed down. Whatever the reason, Naha no longer felt hunted. That alone was a new kind of freedom she never knew before. One evening, while preparing supper, Naha found herself humming a soft tune. It surprised her. She hadn't realized she was comfortable enough to hum. Thomas smiled faintly when he heard it. The cabin felt alive in a gentle, quiet way. Later that night, they sat outside watching the stars. The sky was clear, filled with endless sparkling dots. Naha rested her hands on her knees and looked thoughtful. After a long silence, she spoke. She said she used to believe no man would ever want her, not as a wife, not as a friend, not even as a person worth knowing. She said she had carried those words like a heavy rock in her heart for so long. But now, when she looked at Thomas, she realized someone had wanted her all along. Not for what she could give, not for what she could do, but simply for who she was. Thomas didn't rush to answer. He let her speak until her voice softened. She looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet emotion. She said she wanted to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she finally felt like she belonged somewhere. She felt wanted, accepted, safe. Thomas felt something shift inside him, something deep and warm. He told her she was free to stay for as long as she wished, days, months, years. He said the ranch was her home if she wanted it to be. He didn't speak loudly or boldly. He spoke with the steady calm that had always comforted her. Naha's breath trembled, but not from fear. This time from relief, gratitude, and hope. The sun had set completely by then, and the world around them was quiet, except for the whisper of the wind. Naha leaned her shoulder gently against Thomas's arm, trusting him completely. He didn't pull away. He stayed still, letting her know without words that her place beside him was natural, welcome, and permanent. From that evening on, something soft and unspoken grew between them. Not rushed, not forced, not dramatic, just real, patient, and kind. Naha continued to care for little Star, who grew stronger each day. She continued to help around the ranch, laugh at small things, and share stories with Thomas. The ranch felt full of life in a way it never had before. Thomas continued to protect her, teach her, and offer the quiet steadiness that made her bloom into a confident young woman. He never tried to control her or change her. He simply stood by her side. And Naha, once convinced no man wanted her, finally understood the truth. She wasn't unwanted. She wasn't forgotten. She wasn't a burden. She was home. And Thomas, who once lived his days in quiet loneliness, now shared a life filled with warmth and gentle companionship. He hadn't planned to keep her, but he realized he never wanted her to walk away again. Together, they made a life full of calm days, steady work, peaceful evenings, and a bond that grew naturally like the land itself, strong, grounded, and enduring. Their story didn't end with excitement or noise. It ended with something better. It ended with peace.